Ever heard of a super smart leader from long ago? Let's discover Nizam Al-Mulk Tusi. Nizam Al-Mulk was a powerful advisor in Persia nearly 1,000 years ago. He created schools, helped kings make smart choices, and wrote books that people still read today. His ideas made life better for everyone in his country. Now that's a real legend, Nizam Al-Mulk Tusi. A great statesman and educationist. Who was Nizam Al-Mulk Tusi? His name was Hassan, his nickname, kunyat, was Abu Ali, and his title was Nizam Al-Mulk. His lineage is Hassan bin Ali bin Ishaq. Birth Hassan was born on the 21st of Dhul Qa'ada in 408 AH, 1017 CE, on a Friday in the village of Radkan located in Tus, Persia. His association with Tus leads to the addition of Tusi next to his title. Childhood and early life. Hassan belonged to a middle-class family of landowners. His father, Ali bin Ishaq, was engaged in agriculture. His mother, Zamurid Khatun, named him Hassan after the Prophet's grandson due to a dream she had before he was born. Hassan was young when his mother passed away. His father was facing financial difficulties at the time, but cognizant of the importance of knowledge, he arranged for a good quality education for his son. He himself was considered an expert in mathematics, measurement, and jurisprudence, which is why the local governor appointed him as tax collector. When Hassan entered school, his first teacher was the scholar Abdul Samad Kandoji. Hassan's extraordinary intellect and memory soon made him prominent among his peers. He was naturally organized and disciplined from a young age. He advised his teachers on how to divide the large number of students into efficient groups, with some students as monitors. This organizational skill helped him a lot in later years. At the age of 11, he finished memorizing the Quran, after which his father sent him to Nishapur. Nishapur was at the time considered a hub of knowledge and education. Here he joined the lectures of Imam Mawfiq, a respected scholar within the Shafi'i school of thought. He studied with him for 4 years, then traveled to Bukhara where he studied many disciplines from various religious schools. Like his father, he had a special interest in mathematics. He also became proficient in the Arabic language, as well as frequently attended the lectures of Hadith scholars. Hassan spent a few years in Ghazni, working in an office to earn money. His marriage and the subsequent birth of 2 sons increased his financial responsibilities. He therefore traveled to Balkh and became secretary to the governor Abu Ali Ahmed bin Shazan. After a while, the governor's hard temper persuaded him to leave the post, and he headed towards Merv, the capital city of Khorasan, which was then ruled by Chagri Baig Dawood Saljuki. He joined Dawood's court, who soon discovered his talents and appointed him the mentor and tutor of his son Alp Arslan. He instructed his son to respect his tutor as he respected his father, and to never ignore his advice. Alp Arslan remained Hassan's student until his father Dawood died. 5 years later, Dawood's brother Tughril, the leader of the Seljuk kingdom, died childless. His death sparked conflict over the succession of the kingdom. Hassan's clever reasoning and strategy led to the resolution of the conflict, and he was able to maneuver Alp Arslan into the position of the ruler. Alp Arslan appointed Hassan as his special vizier and gave him the title Nizam Al-Mulk, which can be translated as Order of the Kingdom. Alp Arslan also appointed Hassan as the mentor of his 11-year-old son, Malik Shah. The heavy burden of maintaining order and discipline in the huge dynasty now fell mainly on Hassan's shoulders. The Seljuki Empire was vast, stretching from Yemen to China. To understand properly what Nizam al-Mulk attempted and achieved during his time as a vizier, a description of the historical backdrop of the time is necessary. Historical background. With the downfall of the Abbasid Caliphate came the end of political unity within the Islamic world. The governors of different regions formed their own independent kingdoms. The Persians formed the Samanid dynasty, which encompassed all of today's Afghanistan, as well as large parts of Transoxiana, most of what is now known as Central Asian republics, called Mawara-un-Nahar in Arabic, and Khorasan. Another Persian family called the Buyids of Daylamite origins ruled the rest of Iran. The Fatimid Caliphate also came into existence, ruling initially over North Africa and Egypt and slowly expanding into Syria, Yemen, and Hijaz. Of all these independent empires, the Fatimid dynasty was the most powerful. It ruled for almost 300 years, from 296 AH to 567 AH. On the other hand, the Samanid Empire declined quite fast, and a local governor of Ghazni, Afghanistan, called Sebuktigin, formed an autonomous government in 366 AH, which was later called the Ghaznavid Empire. It was against this backdrop that the Seljuki Turks began rising to power. The Seljukis originated from the areas between Turkestan and China, and their larger tribes were very powerful in Turkestan. The ruler Yabgu greatly respected the Turk leader Dakak. When Dakak's son Seljuk grew up, his extraordinary talents and leadership skills astonished everyone. Yabgu was clever enough to appoint Seljuk as the commander of his army. Seljuk's quick rise through the ranks and his rapid successes gave birth to jealousy and conspiracies amongst members of the court. Many began to plot against him, and sensing the danger to himself, Seljuk left Turkestan with his tribes to settle instead under the rule of the Muslims, embracing Islam. After succeeding in bringing order and organization to his tribes, he began to advance slowly into Transoxiana. This area was populated mostly by Muslims under the rule of Yabgu, who demanded tribute from those living there. Soon, Seljuk had won a significant number of battles, and a large area had fallen under his control. Thus, he laid the foundations of the Seljuk Empire. He had 4 sons, of whom Arsalan and Mikhail are the most famous for having sons that went on to become great sultans. The Seljuki rulers of Iran and Iraq were his descendants. After Mikhail's offspring, Arslan's children prospered as well. They formed their empire in Asia Minor, modern-day Anatolia, and the Ottoman Turks are their legacy. To delve into some of the details, after Seljuk's death, his sons spread out into the various areas of Transoxiana. They clashed in bloody battles with the Ghaznavids, the rulers of Khwarezm, and the rulers of Bukhara. The real reason for these repeated battles was that the surrounding rulers were intimidated by the growing power of the Seljuks, and often initiated the fighting to distract and weaken the empire. Arslan was captured in one such battle with the Ghaznavids, and he died in captivity. Mikhail was martyred in a fight against the non-Muslim Turks. He had 3 prominent sons, Tughril Beg, Chagri Dawood, and Yabgu. Tughril Beg was a consummate warrior, and he led his army against the Ghaznavids who had attacked the Seljuks, afraid of their increasing power. Tughril, however, established a great defense and defeated Masudurst of Ghazni in a war that culminated in the Battle of Dandanakan in 1040 CE, 429 AH. The Seljuk Empire was thus established in Khorasan, after which Tughril headed west and conquered most of Iran. In 447 AH, he entered Baghdad, which was then under the control of the Buyids, ridding the Abbasids of them. The Seljuks had now emerged as a powerful empire, ranging from Khorasan to Persia and Iraq. In 423 AH, the Caliph in Baghdad summoned Tughril to his court, formally recognizing his right to rule and granting him an affirming decree. Thus began the Seljuk dynasty. All of Mikhail's sons were included as rulers of the Seljuki Empire. Tughril Beg, Chagri Dawood, Yabgu, and their offspring were all entrusted with the rule of various areas of the empire. After Tughril's death, his nephew Alp Arslan, the son of Chagri Dawood, became the Great Seljuk, while the rest of the family governed the local areas they were responsible for. When Alp Arslan ascended the throne, it was Nizam Al-Mulk who took it upon himself to help him maintain law and order of such a great empire. He did this so well that he is considered to this day as the greatest and wisest vizier of the Muslim history. Nizam Al-Mulk, the wise advisor. Nizam Al-Mulk was not a traditional politician. Having been given the great responsibility of maintaining the order of an entire empire, he did not resort to the underhanded tactics that were frequently employed by his fellow courtiers to undermine their rivals and opponents. His chosen method was instead to focus all his energy, skills, and experience into improving the governance and solving the problems of the people. He defeated his opponents not by conspiracies and manipulations, but by his outstanding performance. His wisdom and intelligence led him to suggest effective solutions to even the trickiest and most puzzling difficulties. He often used this to extract the Sultan out of delicate situations, thus earning his favor and consequently having great influence over him. He gained extraordinary power and influence as vizier due to this. His goal was not to maximize his personal interests by gaining power or position. He wanted a powerful and united Muslim empire instead of several dispersed Muslim states. A united Muslim empire was in the best collective interest of the Muslims, as it could successfully defend them against the multiple non-Muslim forces of the time. He also wanted to bring about peace and prosperity for the Muslims that lived under the empire's protection. It is considered a nigh impossible task to be a loyal companion to a king while remaining true to the values of a Muslim and safeguarding the rights of Muslim populace. Nizam Al-Mulk, however, proved that it was indeed possible, and he has set a shining example for all Muslim advisors and viziers to follow. Nizam al-Mulk was known for finding solutions that had the most advantages and the least disadvantages. When he rose to the rank of vizier, the matter under consideration was that the caliph in Baghdad needed to be persuaded to recognize Alp Arslan as an autonomous Islamic ruler. Nizam al-Mulk suggested that the petitioner to the caliph should be one whom the caliph would find it hard to deny. Thus he convinced Tughril's wife, who also happened to be the caliph's daughter, to go to Baghdad and petition her father to recognize Alp Arslan's right to rule. Tughril's wife was therefore sent with many gifts and courtesies to persuade the caliph, who, as predicted, did not wish to refuse his daughter, and awarded Alp Arslan the title of Ziauddin Adad al-Dawla, thus approving his sultanate. Nizam al-Mulk was always careful that relations with the caliphate in Baghdad should remain warm and friendly. He abhorred the idea of Muslims fighting each other over small slights or careless insults. Once Alp Arslan chose as the ambassador to the caliphate a man whose son had killed the caliph's personal slave. The caliph refused to receive the man or accept him as the Seljuk Empire's ambassador. Alp Arslan was inclined to stand firm on his decision, which would have pitted two Muslim empires against each other. Nizam al-Mulk talked him down, convincing him that the right course of action would be to call back the previous ambassador and announce the appointment of a new one in order to preserve the friendship between the two powers. Alp Arslan acted on Nizam al-Mulk's advice, and the caliph in Baghdad immediately accepted the new appointment. Good relations with neighboring kingdoms had always been an issue for the Seljuk Empire. To resolve this, Nizam al-Mulk proposed that the Sultan should continue the tradition of political marriages. The Sultan arranged a marriage between his sister and Hazarasp, the governor of Basra, while he himself married the widowed daughter of Qadir Khan, the ruler of Kashgar. These marriages heralded peace for the people, and having built family ties, the sultans lived peacefully with each other. As the caliphate in Baghdad had declined in power, Muslims had begun fighting amongst each other rather than fighting the non-Muslims. Thus, much of the area had been split into tiny independent kingdoms. The Seljuk dynasty annexed these splinter countries into itself and founded a strong, united empire which aimed to preserve the dignity of the caliphate in Baghdad rather than compete with it. The Seljuk Empire bordered the Byzantine Empire based in Constantinople. The Byzantine government naturally preferred to deal with several small, weak Muslim nations rather than a single united one, and they were always on the lookout for an opportunity to weaken the emerging Seljuk Empire. The Seljuks and the Byzantines were often engaged in skirmishes and minor conflicts, building up to an inevitable major confrontation. In 456 AH, 1063 CE, Alp Arslan invaded Armenia and Georgia, where both his son and Nizam Al-Mulk Tusi showed great bravery and skill in the battlefield, conquering multiple strongholds belonging to the enemy. Then Alp Arslan himself led the army's command and conquered one castle after the other, until a large portion of Georgia had been taken over. The ruler of Georgia agreed to a truce whose terms included a tribute paid each year to the Muslims. Thus, the Byzantine Empire, which demanded yearly tributes from Armenia and Georgia, received the message clearly. The Seljuk Empire was strong and not to be taken lightly. In the summer of 1071 CE, 463 AH, the Emperor Romanos Diogenes undertook a massive campaign to engage the Seljuks in a battle with a Byzantine army almost 300,000 large in revenge for the earlier invasion. With no time to prepare, Alp Arslan dispatched a brief army, numbering around 15,000 soldiers, which soundly defeated the Byzantines, confiscating the Holy Cross that the army had carried and sending it to Baghdad as a sign of victory. In retaliation, the Byzantines raided and took the fortress of Alat from the Muslims, but the very next day, the Muslims had retaken the fortress. Alp Arslan was not inclined to prolong the conflict. The confrontation had been sparked by the Byzantines, and now that the Seljuks had clearly repelled them and made a show of power, he sent the Byzantine emperor an offer of truce. Romanos, however, scoffed at the offer and replied with the message that the only truce will be one arranged when we have reached your throne. The fighting began once more. At the Battle of Maniskert, the Byzantine army was dealt an ignominious defeat by the Muslims, who prevailed even though outnumbered by the Romans. Romanos was taken prisoner and was ransomed for a huge amount of money. A peace treaty was agreed upon, resolving that instead of fighting the Muslims, the emperor would send aid to the Seljuks if they needed it against their other enemies. It was also agreed that all Muslims that had been taken prisoner during the war would be released. As the 10-year-long treaty was being signed, Nizam Al-Mulk ensured that all the captives, including the emperor and priests, were treated with hospitality and dignity, even honoring them with gifts when released. This was to ensure that they would become sympathetic towards the Muslims and perhaps act as allies once they returned to court, benefiting the Seljuks. The treaty, unfortunately, could not be upheld properly due to a coup in the Byzantine capital, which resulted in Romanos being overthrown and a change in leadership. Therefore, some amount of conflict with the Byzantine Empire continued. However, the war and the subsequent Muslim victory reminded the surrounding Christian kingdoms, always on the lookout for an opportunity to attack the Muslims, that the Seljuks were a force to be reckoned with. Nizam Al-Mulk always believed in being kind after a show of power had subdued the enemy, because he considered it the most effective way to bring someone to your side. Unlike most conquerors of his time, Nizam Al-Mulk did not believe in conquest for the sake of conquest. He knew that the important thing to do after winning a land is to win the hearts of the people, to improve and advance the administration and infrastructure of the area, and to genuinely make it a part of the empire. If nothing but further conquests follow the annexation of a land, the conquered people feel only resentment towards their occupiers, which leads to conflict, revolt, and bloodshed. Thus, after the conquest of Anatolia, Nizam Al-Mulk did not attempt to advance further. Instead, he focused on and succeeded in winning the hearts of the people who had been conquered. That is the main reason why, even now, Anatolia is a Muslim-majority land. After having mitigated the urgent internal and external dangers to the empire, Nizam Al-Mulk turned his attention to the future. Using his influence, he managed to arrange the Friday sermon, read in the grand mosques of Makkah and Medina, to be read in the name of the Abbasid Caliph. This was a particularly clever move, because these two cities have always been the spiritual and religious centers for Muslims all over the world. At the time, as the Fatimids and Ismailis dominated over much of the Muslim nation, including Egypt and modern-day Saudi Arabia, the Friday sermon was being read in their name. Thus, Shia beliefs were spreading alarmingly fast, while the Sunnis were rather weak politically, and their sects too mired in conflict with each other to properly combat the spread of Shia philosophy. Nizam Al-Mulk realized that this could become a serious problem for the Sunnis in the coming years, and he had already begun to think of a peaceful way to prevent the Shia beliefs from taking hold. His strong political insight led him to the conclusion that the Fatimids, although appearing to be strong and majestic, had begun to weaken internally due to a combination of administrative and financial problems. Thus, The citizens of Makkah and Medina were already growing dissatisfied with the aristocrats and the government. The Seljuk dynasty, by contrast, was seen as a rising star and impressed everyone with its power and grandeur. Using this as an opportunity, Nizam Al-Mulk met with the local governor of Makkah, Muhammad bin Abi Hashim, in 462 AH. The meeting was warm and pleasant, and the governor was treated with utmost respect and honor. Nizam al-Mulk convinced him during this meeting to break from the Fatimid Empire and give his allegiance to Alp Arslan instead. Muhammad bin Abi Hashim was willing to be persuaded, and he agreed to arrange for the Friday sermons in Makkah and Medina to be read in the Seljuk's name. Soon the surrounding areas had adopted the same behavior, and the region began to break free of Shia influence. The Fatimid dynasty, indeed weakened by its internal affairs, could not afford to confront the Seljuks and allowed the areas to slip out of their sphere of influence. Thus, Nizam al-Mulk succeeded in averting a great potential conflict with peaceful means, without any bloodshed due to his clever strategy and political insight. Malik Shah's rule, the height of Nizam al-Mulk's power. In 458 AH, Alp Arslan formally named his son Malik Shah as the heir to the throne. During an invasion of Transoxiana in 465 AH, a Castellan was captured and brought before Alp Arslan. The Castellan was defiant and insolent, and Alp Arslan ordered him to be punished. Before he could be taken away, he lunged forward and attacked the Sultan, administering a fatal wound. Alp Arslan died at the young age of 40, having ruled only for 10 years. Before this attack, Alp Arslan had asked Nizam al-Mulk to remain faithful to his son after he died, and to help him with the ruling of the empire. At the time of Alp Arslan's death, Nizam al-Mulk and Malik Shah were both away on a campaign in Turkestan. Upon receiving the news of his death, Nizam al-Mulk immediately ordered the army to turn back to the capital, Ray, postponing the Turkestan campaign. As soon as he got back, he arranged for Malik Shah's coronation, accepting oaths of allegiance from the military commanders and the various members of the nobility. With great haste, Nizam al-Mulk also had the caliphate in Baghdad confirm Malik Shah's ascension, so that the sermons could be read in his name. He also sent news of Malik Shah's coronation alongside the news of Alp Arslan's death to the surrounding areas, in an attempt to forestall any invasion by foreign powers. Finally, the army might have posed a threat to the young king, so Nizam al-Mulk ordered an increase of 700,000 dinars in the military's salaries, thus pleasing and placating the army. These quick steps were hugely successful in averting the chaos and rebellion that often accompanied a change in power. Alp Arslan's nephew Kaverd Beg attempted to claim the throne and start a rebellion against Malik Shah, but Nizam al-Mulk eliminated the threat he posed before he could gain much momentum. If Nizam al-Mulk had been at all slow in ensuring a swift transfer of power, the empire would almost certainly have fallen into civil war, greatly harming the interests of the Muslims as whole. Thus, Nizam al-Mulk played a vital role in stabilizing the kingdom while fulfilling his oath of allegiance to the young sultan. On a number of other occasions, Nizam al-Mulk's actions prevented the empire from falling into civil war and internal conflict. One such situation occurred when Malik Shah's uncle claimed in court that he had letters from various military officers swearing allegiance to him if he made a play for the throne. He declared that he wanted to read the letters out loud to the court. Incensed at the claim, Malik Shah commanded Nizam al-Mulk to take the bundle of letters from his uncle and read them aloud to see if there was any truth in what he said. Nizam al-Mulk took the letters as ordered, but instead of reading them aloud, he threw them into the nearby fireplace. He knew that if the claims were proven true, the military officers involved would have to be heavily punished for treason, and this could lead to a revolt by the army. The best way to deal with the matter was to not let it gain any importance. Malik Shah knew that Nizam al-Mulk always had a wise reason for his actions, so he did not openly object to the disobedience, and the empire was saved from a potential rebellion. Having such a capable minister at his disposal meant that Malik Shah had much time at his hand for hunting and other sports. His skilled second-in-command had taken all his burdens and duties upon himself, and did such an excellent job that the entire empire, spreading from the Holy Land of Jerusalem to China, was peaceful and prosperous. It does not mean that Malik Shah was incapable of running his kingdom. Rather, his minister was even more talented and competent at doing so. Nizam Al-Mulk had a habit of rescuing Malik Shah from dangerous situations that could have led to terrible outcomes. Once, when the Caesar of the Roman Empire had invaded the Seljuk kingdom, Malik Shah led the army to confront him. During a lull in the hostilities, Malik Shah left the army outpost with a few of his companions to hunt, and was apprehended by Roman soldiers who took him and his companions back to their camp as captives. Dressed in civilian clothing, Malik Shah was unrecognizable as the Sultan, and the soldiers did not realize who they had captured. When Nizam Al-Mulk found out what had happened, he ensured that the information was kept quiet in the Muslim army camp. He gave the impression that the Sultan had returned to the camp, then calmly arranged a meeting with the Caesar. During the meeting, Nizam Al-Mulk was utterly relaxed, not allowing his words or his demeanor to betray how anxious he was. If the Caesar discovered just who it was that he had captured, the Romans would have great leverage and their position would become vastly more favorable. Nizam Al-Mulk kept control of his emotions and had a serene conversation with the Caesar about a variety of matters. At the end of the talk, the Caesar mentioned carelessly that a few of the soldiers from the Muslim army had been found and captured, and offered to release them to Nizam Al-Mulk. When the captives, including Malik Shah, were brought to him, Nizam Al-Mulk publicly and rather severely reprimanded the soldiers for their foolishness in wandering into enemy territory for the sake of a hunting trip. Then he swiftly took his leave of the Caesar, taking with him the released prisoners and bringing the Sultan safely back to his army. When the Roman Caesar later found out what had actually transpired, he was astonished and awed at Nizam Al-Mulk's brilliant handling of such a precarious situation. Allah, SWT, had given Nizam Al-Mulk the rare ability to know what needs to be done at any given moment. He had the wisdom to take small steps to prevent huge catastrophes. After the conquest of Samarkand, Malik Shah had invaded Kashgar, a city in modern China, when the Roman delegate requested permission to come to the capital to pay the yearly tribute. Nizam Al-Mulk instructed him to travel to Kashgar instead and arranged for the tribute to be received there. The reasoning behind this was that the delegate would have to travel the breadth of the Seljuk Empire to reach Kashgar, and the vastness and the grandeur of the empire would awe and intimidate him. When he would narrate his first-hand impressions to the Caesar of Rome and his court, it would have a more profound effect on them, and they would likely hesitate before attacking the Muslims again. Nizam Al-Mulk's care for the common people, immersed in the cutthroat world of politics as he was, Nizam Al-Mulk never forgot that his first responsibility was to the people of the land. Once, when Alp Arslan was facing financial difficulties because of conflict with the Byzantine Empire, he decided to impose an extra tax on the people to fund it. The news of the impending tax distressed the people. Harvest season was still far off, and a plague had spread through much of the empire, killing people left and right. One day in court, Alp Arslan commented with sorrow that the plague was an enemy that could not be stopped, neither by the army nor by money. Nizam Al-Mulk had been awaiting just such an opportunity. He said, "Yes, only justice and compassion can eliminate such a foe." He went on to present several examples from history to prove that it was often the tyranny and oppression of the kings that acted as a curse upon the whole kingdom. Alp Arslan was listening attentively and taking his words to heart. So Nizam Al-Mulk added that if the Sultan wanted to be a blessing and not a curse upon his empire, he could make some overtures of kindness to his people. Alp Arslan was convinced, and he withdrew his previous decision to impose an extra tax on the people. Nizam Al-Mulk placed great importance on the dispensation of justice to the people. He worked to ensure easy access to justice for people from all walks of life, and made certain that the justice was swift and immediate. In his book Dastur al-Wuzara, roughly translated as Code of Conduct for Viziers, he writes that it is a commandment from Allah that your rulings must be just. If even a single decision is unfair or against the will of Allah, then not even 100 years of fair ruling will be sufficient enough to make up for the sin. Nizam Al-Mulk detested the difficulties that people commonly faced when trying to meet government officials. His own subordinates had instructions to allow the people in audience with him whenever someone came with a petition or request. Once he was eating his meal when a woman arrived with a petition for him. The guard stopped her from entering until he had finished his meal. When Nizam Al-Mulk found out, he was very displeased and reprimanded the guards, saying that their purpose was to serve the people, especially the poor and the needy. Privileged people could usually gain access through their resources and influence, but the less privileged deserved access to their rulers too. Nizam al-Mulk often used his position and influence to sway the Sultan to his point of view when it came to the welfare of the peasantry and the common people. He put a definitive end to regressive, unfair taxes which burdened the poor more than the rich. He ordered wells, reservoirs, and irrigation channels to be built across the empire to improve ease of access to clean water for drinking and agriculture. He arranged for hospitable inns to be built on the major streets frequented by pilgrims in order to make the pilgrimage easier for the Muslims. To improve infrastructure, he ordered a network of paved roads to be laid throughout the empire, as well as sturdy bridges built across rivers. He had a special passion for constructing mosques everywhere. He also built lush gardens in various regions to improve the beauty of the land. As a result, people became happy and prosperous. History teaches us that when the people are happy and prosperous, and the rulers are genuine in their wish to rule fairly and please the people, peace and security follow automatically. Thus it was that under Nizam al-Mulk's administration, people's lives and properties were safe and secure across the kingdom. The people slept safely in their beds at night, not fearing for themselves or their family or their possessions. Beyond all this, however, perhaps the greatest service Nizam al-Mulk did for his people was in the field of education. To understand the importance of his actions, it is first necessary to have an idea of what the state of education was in the Muslim world before Nizam al-Mulk's arrival on the scene. A summary is presented here from Dr. Ahmad Shalabi's book, History of Muslim Education. Brief overview of the Muslim education system. Before 5th century Hijri, examining the history of Islam tells us that since the very beginning, there was a great thirst for knowledge amongst the Muslims. Here a question arises. Why were the early Muslims so keen to gain knowledge, when before the advent of Islam, Arabs as a nation were largely illiterate? It is narrated that there were perhaps only 17 literate people in Makkah at the time of the first revelation. However, the oral tradition was exceptionally strong among the Arabs. The ancient Arab trade fairs held at Ukaz, Majna, and Zu al-Majaz were famous for their poetry contests and debates, but the topics under discussion were limited to legends about their ancestors, love stories, Arabian history, and the reciting of pedigrees and family trees. After Islam rose to prominence, there were a great many changes in the various aspects of life in Arabia, and education was no different. The reason for this can be traced back to the importance of seeking knowledge in Islam and Prophet Muhammad's particular instructions regarding education. The Prophet, Esa, himself set an example in this regard. Several of the captives from the Battle of Badr were released upon the condition that they would educate a select number of Muslims and teach them to read and write. This would be their ransom payment. Multiple sayings of the Prophet, Sa, exalting the importance of knowledge and describing the clear superiority of the scholar over the ignorant, sparked a tendency in Muslims to favor and encourage the growth of knowledge. In the Quran, Allah himself orders the Prophet, Sa, to pray for enhancement in his knowledge. The trend thus started by the Prophet himself continued after him during the Rashidun Caliphate. Afterwards, the Umayyads continued on the same path, and it peaked at the time of the Abbasids, who proved themselves to be true benefactors of knowledge and education. In the early era of Islamic history, the knowledge of Quran was considered the basic field of education. To pursue education and to learn to read and write, students would travel to the teacher's house and attend him or her there. The centers or houses where a teacher taught their students were called kutab. Imam Shafi'i mentions such a center. My mother sent me to a kutab, and after I had finished the Quran, I entered the mosque for further education. Soon the number of kutab and teachers in the Islamic world began to rise rapidly. Other than the kutab, the mosques held special significance as centers of education. Several companions of the Prophet had their own literary circles in the main mosques of various areas. Abdullah bin Abbas, R.A., held tafsir, Quranic explanation, lectures in Masjid al-Haram in Makkah every Thursday. Abdullah bin Umar, R.A., gave lectures in Medina, Ma'ad bin Jabal, R.A., in Yemen, Abu Musa Ash'ari, Ray, in Basra, Abdullah bin Masud, Ray, in Kufa, Ubadah bin Samit, Ray, in Syria, and Abu Darda, Ray, and Abdullah bin Amr bin As, R.A., gave lectures at the local mosques in Egypt. The same passion for seeking knowledge continued in the next two generations of the Tabi'in, companions of the companions, and their companions, Tabi'in, with the mosques as the center of knowledge and education. Masjid an-Nabawi, for example, was the venue of Imam Rabi'a Rai and Imam Malik's lectures. As time went on, religious education came to include more than the recitation and explanation of the Quran. It involved the Quran's interpretation, the science of hadith, sayings, actions, or silent approvals of the Prophet, and jurisprudence. Apart from the Arabic language, the fields of history and medicine also began to increase in importance. The second Caliph Umar, R.A., particularly instructed that children should be educated in archery, horse riding, famous quotations, and good quality poetry. Mathematics and calligraphy soon gained a place in the field of education as their importance grew. It was considered essential for a scholar to be educated in these basic fields before they could be considered learned. This increase in the areas of learning meant that it was no longer feasible for all the classes to be held in the mosque. Some of the activities could be potentially disruptive to the solemn atmosphere of the mosque. Thus, religious education remained centered in the mosques, while the other fields of education tended to have experts that taught in their homes to where students traveled in order to learn from them. To learn the pure eloquence of the Arabic language, the best practice was to stay for a while with the Bedouins in the desert who spoke pure Arabic uncontaminated by the city dialects. Imam Shafi'i spent several years with the Bedouin precisely for this purpose. The state sponsorship of education began because the caliphs of the time often preferred the company of scholars and learned men. From the time of Caliph Muawiyah, 661-680 CE, scholars were invited to court to discuss topics such as the history of various nations and foreign rulers. These scholars would also give their advice on a range of issues. The Umayyad caliphs began to appoint tutors for the young princes who would often live in the palace and teach the princes the knowledge of Quran as well as poetry, history, public speaking, eloquence, and quotes of wise men. These tutors were not only responsible for the education of these princes, but also for their moral growth, to teach them ethics, etiquettes, and manners. During the Umayyad rule, many learned scholars and respected wise men began to avoid going to the palace because of the sheer opulence, royal protocol, and the disregard for Islamic teachings that was reflected in the manners of the court. Later, the Abbasids followed in the Umayyad footsteps and provoked much the same reaction of repulsion and avoidance amongst Islamic scholars and wise men. They refused to come to the palace to educate the princes in the worldly or religious sciences. When the famous Caliph Harun al-Rashid attempted to appoint prominent scholars as private tutors for his sons, they insisted that the princes should join the regular classes and be educated amongst the rest of the students. The Fatimids subsequently found a solution to this conundrum by establishing classes in the palace for young men of the nobility to be educated madrasa style. The teachers were paid handsome salaries, and this trend became so popular that the royal palaces became a hub for education and knowledge. Ma'mun al-Rashid's court was bustling with tutors, educators, translators, and historians. This tradition was cherished and continued by all coming successors, the Ghaznavid sultans, the Tulunids, and the Seljuks. The king's court would always be full of philosophers, mathematicians, lawmakers, and physicians, all sponsored and supported by the royal coffers. Other than the houses of the teachers, the mosques, and the royal palaces, bookstores were yet another hotspot of knowledge and education. The fairs and festivals so popular in Arabia before the advent of Islam had been replaced with such book markets. They first became popular in the Abbasid reign. Al-Yaqubi writes that one area of Baghdad boasted more than 100 bookstores. These bookstores were often the sites of spirited debates on one topic or the other. Copies of original books were also done painstakingly in these bookstores. Prominent scholars like Al-Jahiz would pay for the opportunity to be locked into one of these bookshops overnight, where they could read whatever book they wanted to their heart's content and to make copies of whatever sections they liked. The market of Baghdad has been mentioned by Ibn al-Jawzi, and the market of Cairo, Souk al-Warakin, by al-Makrisi, teeming with scholars and students eager for knowledge. In addition to bookstores, libraries were also a center of educational activities. The Abbasid caliphs were the forerunners in this endeavor, and it was Harun al-Rashid who established the Bait al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, which became a major intellectual center of the Islamic world. It was not merely a library housing a vast number of books, but also a hub for the translation of books from various languages, and a research center for scientific discoveries. These libraries grew so prevalent that every noble and commoner with love of knowledge was racing to have a private library of their own. Not only did the major cities of Shiraz, Cordoba, and Cairo possess great libraries, but smaller cities also had a number of them. The Fatimids' greatest library was housed in an enormous building with 40 rooms, each of which could store up to 18,000 books. Dr. Ahmad Shalabi writes about this love for knowledge. In 355 AH, the Khorasani soldiers had annihilated the Vizier Ibn al-Amid's palace so badly that not even a single pitcher or glass remained unbroken. At such a time, Ibn al-Amid was weighed down with grief and worry about the state of his library, of which no news had reached him. When the library's custodian and famous scholar Ibn Miskawayh arrived to inform him that the books had been rescued without damage, Ibn al-Amid lit up with pleasure, saying, "You have brought joyful news. All other things can be replaced." The tradition of collecting books and rare manuscripts had become so prevalent in Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, that even peasant farmers had a library room in their houses. Like modern libraries, these libraries were fully cataloged and each book properly indexed, available for loan to others against a deposit. If a science or literature expert required quick access to a book, they were allowed to enter the library even outside public hours. The larger libraries employed scribes and translators for the express purpose of copying and translating manuscripts. The great library of the Banu Ammar emirs of Tripoli, in modern-day Libya, had around 180 scribes employed to make copies of manuscripts. Of those, 30 were appointed on the night shift so that the scribing process could continue 24 hours a day. It was important to create an encouraging environment for education, as the times changed and culture and civilization grew and prospered. This was done by arranging for the scholarships and residence of students, and setting up salaries for the teachers who dedicated their lives to spreading knowledge. People eager for knowledge traveled thousands of miles to reach the centers of knowledge and science, and to benefit from the great prominent scholars of the time. It was a logistical nightmare to arrange for their food and board, and to arrange classes in a way that was practically feasible, and yet not too time-consuming for an individual. It was too inefficient to visit different areas of a city to learn from various experts in their respective fields. So the tradition of a madrasa was begun. Initially, the few madrasas that were founded were dedicated to the religious education of a particular school of jurisprudence. Then the Fatimids founded several madrasas with the intention of encouraging Shiite beliefs throughout their kingdom. When the Seljuks conquered Baghdad and an effort was made to renew the Sunni beliefs, the madrasas were seen as essential to this endeavor. Nizam Al-Mulk dedicated himself to the establishing of such madrasas with the support of Alp Arslan and then Malik Shah. Soon a whole network of madrasas had been laid down across the empire. Nizam al-Mulk's campaign of opening madrasas in every area of the entire kingdom was so effective that this achievement alone is enough to cement his place in history. The Nizamiya Institutes, Nizam al-Mulk's incredible achievement and a great education movement. Nizam al-Mulk was not just a brilliant statesman and a political thinker, he was also a great believer in the importance of education and seeking knowledge. He enjoyed the company of scholars and learned men. He was particularly interested in learning the hadith sciences. He would also lecture occasionally in Baghdad and Khorasan on hadith. Before his appointment as minister, many scholars had been banished from their domiciles due to political complications. Nizam al-Mulk put in a lot of effort to have them return safely to their centers to continue their work. Such scholars included the Imam of the Grand Mosques in Makkah and Medina, as well as prominent scholar Abu al-Qasim al-Kushairi. Nizam al-Mulk had great admiration for these people, often standing to invite them to sit in his place, and sitting cross-legged in front of them to indicate respect. It was this regard for knowledge that led Nizam al-Mulk to accomplish a feat which would name him the founder of madrasas in golden ink in the pages of history. Nizam al-Mulk believed that the process of teaching and learning for students and teachers should be made as easy and convenient as possible. The lack of facilities, the long, arduous journeys, and the shortage of supplies often made it impossible for those involved to dedicate themselves to the act of gaining and dispensing knowledge as much as they would like. He felt severely the need for an institution where the environment could be focused completely on knowledge, and where enough facilities were available so that the students and the teachers would need not worry about anything other than their work. These institutes needed to be in every corner of the land, so that those who sought knowledge would not have to travel long and hard just to find an opportunity to learn. Starting on his scheme, Nizam al-Mulk founded institutes of education in Nishapur, Balkh, Herat, Isfahan, Basra, Merv, Mosul, and in every major city in Iraq. He established a madrasa and a library in every town inhabited by a prominent or known scholar. According to a tradition, he established madrasas and libraries in locations as far off as Jazirat ibn Umar, modern-day island Sizre in Anatolia, Turkey. Named after him, the institutes or madrasas began to be called Nizamiya institutes. These institutes were financially supported either by Nizam al-Mulk personally or through the properties that the state granted to be held in trust, endowed, or made waqf for the institute. These properties included land, buildings, shops, and other income-generating assets. Only the best tutors were chosen to teach at the Nizamiya institutes, and they were paid a handsome salary. Students were granted generous scholarships. Just Baghdad boasted around 30 madrasas, and the buildings of the madrasas were often as grand and majestic as the palace itself, meant to awe and humble visitors and seekers of knowledge. One day, Malik Shah commented on the huge wealth that Nizam al-Mulk tended to spend on the Nizamiya institutes, saying, "If you spent the money that you dedicate to these institutes on the army instead, we could conquer the whole world." Nizam al-Mulk replied, "The army you would recruit could only reach a couple of miles with each arrow they shoot. But the army of scholars that I am training, their prayers have the ability to cross the heavens." The most famous and celebrated of all the Nizamiya institutes was the main branch in Baghdad. Its construction began in 457 AH, 1065 CE, and was completed 2 years later at the enormous cost of 200,000 dinars. It was the largest institute of higher education of the time, and could fit hundreds of thousands of people. Its library hosted millions of books, including the entire personal collection of Nizam al-Mulk himself. Rare and valuable books were collected from all over the world to grace the shelves of the library. Abu Ishaq Shirazi, a prominent scholar of the time, was selected as the head of the madrasa. On the day of its inauguration, Abu Ishaq was late in arriving at the institute. Nizam al-Mulk's son, who was in charge of the event, waited a little while and then started the ceremony without the scholar's presence. When Nizam al-Mulk found out, he disapproved of his son's decision, saying, "You made the wrong decision. It would have been better to delay the inauguration of the madrasa for as long as needed, even an entire year. No one but Abu Ishaq can be chosen for this post." Thus, Abu Ishaq was cajoled and persuaded until he agreed 20 days later to take up the job of leading the institute. Nizam al-Mulk understood very well that to begin important work without competent and skilled people is to limit its potential benefit. If time, effort, money, or personal pride needs to be sacrificed to obtain the cooperation of such people, then it is a sacrifice well worth making. There are many details available describing the glory and splendor of the Nizamiya of Baghdad. Here was an opportunity for students to fully dedicate themselves to the pursuit of knowledge. Food, clothing, residence, transport, all were provided for. The magnificent library was available at all times. The curriculum focused on religious studies, Islamic law, interpretation of the Quran, jurisprudence, grammar and literature, the art of debate, history, and geography. Students could specialize in any of these subjects. The entire aura of the institute, and in particular the library, was awe-inspiring and impressive. Scribes, clerks, and custodians of the library were in a constant flurry, busy taking care of the books and adding more to the collection. There was also a center of fatwas, called Dar-ul-Ifta, where the public could come in to ask questions and discuss their problems and receive religious guidance in return. Preachers and public speakers also addressed the people and gave lectures on relevant topics within the building of the Nizamiya Institute. Other than the Nizamiya of Baghdad, the Nizamiya of Nishapur was also a prominent and celebrated madrasa of the time. The head of the institute was Ziauddin al-Juwaini, a prominent theologian who had also served as imam of the grand mosques in Makkah and Medina. He taught at the institute for 30 years. For a long time, these madrasas spread the light of knowledge to those who sought it. The Nizamiya of Baghdad was destroyed some 200 years later during the Mongol invasion, but other madrasas managed to stay standing in the centuries to come. In his book, History of Muslim Education, Dr. Ahmad Shalabi has compiled a list of prominent and known figures who served as teachers in the Nizamiya institutes. From the 5th century Hijri to the end of the 8th century, the list shines with the names of inspiring personalities, including Imam Ghazali and Abu Abdullah al-Tabari. After the 9th century, mentions of these institutes fade out of history books. The reason for this is that financial crises caused due to infighting and civil wars led to the repossession of the awqaf, endowed properties, that had been granted to the madrasas. This severe cut in funding caused a tremendous shock to the structure and facilities of the institutes, and they never recovered, gradually vanishing from existence. The madrasas found by Nizam al-Mulk do not exist anymore, but the good they did and the benefits they produced endure in many forms. The madrasas that exist today in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh have been inspired from the legacy the Nizamiya institutes left behind. However, their curricula need to be updated and brought in line with the contemporary sciences, as was the case during the time of Nizam al-Mulk. Siyasatnama, an unparalleled treatise on politics and statecraft. As the Seljuk dynasty grew and expanded its borders, the Sultan Malik Shah began to feel the need for a book that could serve as a guide and a reference, a book that outlined the principles of governance while also standing as the constitution of the nation. He tasked his ministers Sharf al-Mulk, Majd al-Mulk, and Nizam al-Mulk to write a book for this purpose, which all three of them did. The book compiled by Nizam al-Mulk was the only one that met with Malik Shah's approval and was consequently accepted as the constitution of the empire. The book, written shortly before Nizam al-Mulk's death, gained real recognition and prominence only after he had passed away. Siyasatnama, also known as Siyar al-Muluk, consists of 50 chapters. It describes in detail what factors lie behind political success and what steps are necessary to ensure stability and peace in a country. In this context, Nizam al-Mulk expands at length on topics like desirable characteristics in a king, the privileges and duties of a king, the realities of governing, the responsibilities and challenges facing the ministers of a country, and the process behind selecting good administrators and bureaucrats to run the country. It covers the proper role of other governmental agencies like the armed forces, police, finance department, secret services, etc. It discusses guideline principles and codes for each. Siyasatnama is easy to read and understand, Despite the heavy topics, the average reader does not feel a sense of boredom, nor does the book come across as dry, heavy reading. Instead, Nizam Al-Mulk's eloquence and fluency keep the reader engaged and interested. He does not merely present his arguments on a particular principle or rule, but offers historical events and facts to support his claims. Thus, the book is littered with historical references to events in both Muslim and non-Muslim histories, focusing specially on the ancient empires of Persia and Turkey. He also includes frequent quotes from the Quran and Hadith, as well as insightful quotes from wise men, mystics, and ascetics. The truth of the matter is that Nizam Al-Mulk's book can be considered a guide and a manual for Muslim leaders and politicians of all times. Politics is generally thought to be void of all honor and principles. It is considered an area where anything goes, and all rules and morals may be ignored if needed. Nizam Al-Mulk's book shows how decent, honorable men can and should conduct themselves in the muddy waters of the political arena, and that is the reason that this book gained as much fame amongst non-Muslims as it did amongst Muslims. It has been translated into almost all the major European languages, and the British actually included it as part of the curriculum for civil service training in the Indian subcontinent after its colonization. Nizam Al-Mulk, a great political thinker. Nizam Al-Mulk occupies a place of honor amongst the greatest political thinkers of all times. This is because he was not just a man of theory, but carried with him almost 30 years of experience in the real world of politics. He examined and studied the rise and fall of various governments for years, and remained involved in the administration and management of his country even as power changed hands. Thus, he had the unique opportunity to experience and witness practical politics from a very close perspective, and this sets him apart from other famous political philosophers like Al-Farabi and Al-Mawardi. In his book Siyasatnama, Nizam Al-Mulk deems the rulers of a country as a reflection of the character of the common people they rule over. He says with great certainty that inept kings are imposed upon immoral people. Under their reign, the country falls apart and becomes rife with bloodshed, robberies, and unrest. In the turmoil of this punishment, both good and bad people alike suffer and die. This does not last forever, however, and in His mercy, Allah SWT sends after a while a better ruler who ends the oppression and suffering and brings about positive changes. Nizam Al-Mulk does not make the king accountable to the common people, but he warns him to follow Allah's commands closely and to beware that he will have to answer to Allah for all his actions and decisions. Both ideologically and practically, Nizam Al-Mulk wants to see the king as a faithful and practicing Muslim. In his opinion, the king need not be a great scholar himself, but he should be a friend to knowledge and scholarship, and a promoter of science and arts, of education and advancement. A love for his people, along with an affinity with the poor people and a desire to help them, are also vital characteristics of the ideal king. Along with all these traits, the king should also be courageous and resolute. Above all, he emphasizes again and again that the king should be fair and just. Nizam Al-Mulk says that justice in a kingdom strengthens the empire and the king himself. An unjust and oppressive king cannot retain his power or his throne for long. Nizam Al-Mulk considers it the direct responsibility of the king to establish justice in his kingdom. He presents Prophet Yusuf, Joseph, as well as Prophet Muhammad's companion Umar, R.A., as shining examples of just rulers. He reminds the ruler of the huge honor and favor that Allah, SWT, has promised for rulers and kings who govern their people justly, and recommends that they always keep it in mind. Other than the establishment of justice, Nizam Al-Mulk places great emphasis on consultation and counsel. He says that the king is obliged to take first the counsel of the Quran and Hadith, and then the opinions of experienced wise people. The king should spend time in the company of learned people and scholars, respecting them and heeding their advice. Scholars should also be willing to give sincere and wise advice to the king so that the king does not stray from the path of the righteous. In matters where the Sharia is silent, the expert opinions of professionals should be sought to shape laws and regulations. Once a set of laws has been formulated with careful attention towards divine laws and the public interest, The people should not have the right to denigrate the law or to refuse to obey. The law should be enforced fully, and those who break it should be held immediately accountable. Nizam Al-Mulk repeatedly reminds the king that he should choose the best people to run his country and its administration. He believes that even with the best and most competent king, the kingdom is bound to fail to prosper if the king is surrounded by greedy and inept officials. Nizam Al-Mulk claims that capable and skilled servants are more useful than one's own sons. He advises the king to choose each official according to their skills and talents. He advises never to appoint one person to more than one post, as this may affect his performance. He also opposes the posting of non-Muslims to the most essential and important posts of the kingdom. He firmly reminds the king that he and the other leaders of the country must be of the highest moral standing and character, else the state will suffer. For this reason, it is vital to avoid the company of comedians, singers, poets, and shallow people. He also warns that it is sheer folly to be lax about the officials and administrators of the government. The king should keep a vigilant eye on their actions, knowing that any oppression or injustice on their part will also be on the king's shoulders on the day of judgment. If there are complaints against the appointed officials, the king should be just and fair in his judgment and refrain from unfairly siding with his officials. He also advises that keeping an official post for a long time can lead to treason, conspiracy, and rebellions, so it is best not to leave an official at a particular post for more than 3 years in a row. Nizam Al-Mulk warns the king that shedding the blood of his own people always leads to destabilizing the country and should be avoided at all costs. However, he also advises that murder is a crime that should not be forgiven. The king should separate the judicial system from the administration of the government and ensure that the judges are free to cast their judgments with the administration fully cooperating with the judiciary. This, he believes, is the only way to establish justice in the country. Nizam Al-Mulk further advises the king that if he wants his people to love him, he should not burden them with a multitude of taxes, nor allow unnecessary force and cruelty when taxes are being collected. If the people report such cruelty, their reports and complaints should be heard and taken seriously. If the king succeeds in protecting the lives, wealth, and reputation of the people he serves, they will love him and pray for him, which will in turn strengthen the kingdom even more. Another important factor in maintaining a strong kingdom is that the salaries of civil servants and officials must be paid regularly and on time. To prevent a rebellion from the army, it is useful to mix soldiers from different ethnicities and racial groups together, as this reduces the chances of them forming a faction to plot against the king. Nizam Al-Mulk cautions the king to always remain alert and on the lookout for any danger. He should be acutely aware of the important happenings in other countries, especially in those that are enemies. Thus, ambassadors and diplomats to other countries should be chosen with great care, picking people who are competent and shrewd and able to gather military information as well as political knowledge. In the end, Nizam Al-Mulk reminds the king that kingship is given as a great honor from Allah, but it is also a great responsibility and is a test. If the king fails to abide by the Sharia in personal and collective spheres, is unable to dispense justice, or cannot ensure public welfare, he will have to endure a severe punishment in the hereafter. In another similar book that Nizam Al-Mulk wrote for the viziers called Dastur al-Wuzara, he gives similar instructions and advice. He states that being a vizier is a very dangerous job, because a single piece of bad advice or a little bit of carelessness can lead to injustice and oppression, for which the vizier will be held accountable by Allah. He expresses the opinion that if the vizier is not astute, sincere, wise, and expert on history, or a hard worker willing to spend his life in service of the people, then he may very well cause the destruction of the kingdom, the king, and the people. Thus, he instructs his children not to seek such a position. Conspiracies and suspension history shows that conflict over succession in a kingdom most often leads to disaster for the state, and the same happened to the Seljuks. Malik Shah's wife Turkan Khatun wanted her own son, who was quite young, to be the heir to the throne. Nizam al-Mulk did not like the interference of women in state business, and he believed that Malik Shah's elder son Barkiyaruk was more suited to the position, being a sensible and capable man. Malik Shah himself preferred his elder son for the position of the heir, but he could not bring himself to go entirely against the wishes of Turkan Khatun. Turkan Khatun herself was so invested in seeing her ambitions come to fulfillment that she had recruited another important vizier of Malik Shah, Taj al-Mulk, to her cause. Taj al-Mulk was deeply jealous of Nizam al-Mulk, and Turkan Khatun had promised him that she would arrange for him to replace Nizam al-Mulk if he supported her son's bid for heirdom. Thus, the two joined forces. Turkan Khatun began to whisper in Malik Shah's ears about the threat that Nizam al-Mulk posed to the kingdom. She warned him that Nizam al-Mulk had too much control over the kingdom, spent the kingdom's treasury too freely in useless pursuits, and deliberately awarded high positions in the court to his relatives in order to increase his own power and influence. She suggested that it would be prudent to reduce his power and remove him from his position of influence. The Sultan began to believe his wife and started treating Nizam al-Mulk rather badly, which alerted him that there was some conspiracy afoot. Soon, the relationship became tense, and arguments between the two increased in frequency. Things reached a peak when Malik Shah remarked angrily that he would see the official vizier inkstand removed from Nizam al-Mulk's desk. When Nizam al-Mulk heard these remarks, he responded that if the inkstand was removed from his desk, the crown on Malik Shah's head would not remain for long. This reply made its way to the Sultan's ears, who immediately suspended Nizam al-Mulk and appointed Taj al-Mulk to the position. This suspension is not mentioned by early historians. Most of the later historians, however, describe it in their books. It is thought that the suspension of Nizam al-Mulk was so closely followed by his death that many contemporaries remained unaware of it. Those who believe that his suspension did not take place argue that if Malik Shah was displeased with Nizam al-Mulk, he would not have commissioned him to write a book which then became the kingdom's constitution. They also question Malik Shah's journey to Baghdad, in which he was accompanied by Nizam al-Mulk, which turned out to be Nizam al-Mulk's last journey before his death. If the suspension had taken place, why would the king keep Nizam al-Mulk with him? Whatever the truth of the matter may be, it is certain that after years of stability in the kingdom, plots and conspiracies were once again taking hold. Death fate plays a major role in one's life. When blessings are taken away, everything appears to go wrong for a person. Nizam al-Mulk's life suddenly took an ugly turn. On the one hand was the faction in court plotting against him, while on the other hand Hassan bin Sabah was making dangerous plans for him. Hassan bin Sabah is a blood-drenched character in history who kept kings and their people in terror of himself for a long time. It is said that Nizam al-Mulk, Hassan bin Sabah, and Omar Khayyam were fellow students in their youth, studying under Imam Mawfiq. Once the three friends got together and vowed that if any of them became powerful and influential, that person would use his influence to raise up the other two to share in his fortune. It was well known at the time that most of Imam Mawfiq's students go on to become great and gain power and influence, and such a vow was eminently sensible. The years passed and Nizam al-Mulk continued to rise in the ranks until he reached the position of vizier. One day, Omar Khayyam appeared to remind him of their vow, and Nizam al-Mulk, keeping his promise, introduced him to Malik Shah. Omar Khayyam was a genius, an expert of both science and arts and literature. He was a mathematician, an astronomer, and a poet. Malik Shah was very much impressed and not only ordered a state-of-the-art observatory to be built for him, but also awarded a regular grant so that Omar Khayyam could focus on his studies and research work instead of worrying about making ends meet. On Malik Shah's request, Omar Khayyam designed the Jalali calendar, one that is used even now in some parts of Iran, and is in many ways even more reliable than the Gregorian calendar according to Gibbons. Like Omar Khayyam, Hassan bin Sabah also came to Nizam al-Mulk for the fulfillment of the long-ago promise, according to some historians. Nizam al-Mulk obligingly introduced him to the Sultan's court, where he quickly became a favorite of the Sultan due to his sharp mind and quick wit. However, Hassan's nature was scheming and treacherous, and the Sultan soon came to mistrust him, forcing him to flee from the court and disappear. he re-emerged in the Fatimid court of Al-Mustansir in Cairo, joining the Fatimid movement. Soon he adopted the beliefs of the Batiniya movement, which is an offshoot of the Ismaili sect and was particularly prominent at the time of the Fatimid Caliphate. The Batiniya movement was very active in the proliferation and spreading of their beliefs. When Hassan bin Sabah had the opportunity to come in close contact with the Fatimid Caliph al-Mustansir, the Caliph saw at once how useful his sharp mind could be to the cause and recruited him immediately. Hassan bin Sabah can be described as an evil genius. Instead of straightforward preaching of his beliefs, he drafted a cunning plan. Choosing a mountainous fortress in Gilan as headquarters, he quickly gathered around him a large number of devoted followers. From these he founded an order called the Order of the Assassins. They used tactics of asymmetric warfare, surgical strikes, psychological warfare, and direct assassinations to intimidate and then eliminate any opponents that stood in the way of their cause. Hassan taught his devotees that if they succeeded in their assignments, then heaven would be waiting for them. He even gave them a taste for that heaven by showing them the beautiful gardens of the castle that indeed looked like an earthly paradise, instilling in the assassins such passion for their task that they did not hesitate to kill or die for the sake of the cause. The fortress, known as the Alamut Castle, soon became a center of terror for the whole region. Malik Shah was forced to send a message warning that if their activities did not stop, the fortress would be sacked and razed to the ground. Such a message, however, did not have the desired effect, and Hassan bin Sabah became determined to take his revenge for the humiliation he had suffered in Malik Shah's court years ago. He was displeased already with Nizam Al-Mulk, especially since Nizam Al-Mulk was known to be actively anti-Ismaili, and he also attributed the message to Nizam Al-Mulk's influence. Thus he sent an acolyte from the assassins to eliminate Nizam Al-Mulk. Nizam Al-Mulk departed with Malik Shah on a trip to Baghdad in Ramadan of 495 AH. They stopped in the Persian city of Nahavand. After breaking his fast, Nizam Al-Mulk offered his prayers and then mentioned the Battle of Nahavand, in which the companions of Prophet Muhammad had taken part. Walking around in search of the location where the companions had been martyred, he said, "How lucky are those who may experience the company of such great people." He had just gone a few steps further when a man dressed as a Sufi dervish stopped him, holding out what appeared to be a petition for him to consider. Nizam Al-Mulk stretched out his hand to accept the petition when the man stabbed him with a dagger. The wound was deep, and Nizam Al-Mulk passed away on the spot. When Malik Shah was informed, he rushed there at once and sat weeping for a long time next to the body of his longtime mentor. Nizam Al-Mulk died on the 10th of Ramadan, 495 AH, at the age of 70. Nizam Al-Mulk's sudden death caused much grief across the Islamic world. Such a man who is at once both capable and sincerely devoted to the people is born to a nation very rarely. The man who left the world was a great thinker, a clever politician, an education expert, a loyal vizier with the king's best interests at heart, and a man who protected the people the way a father protects his children. With an air of grief and mourning, Nizam Al-Mulk was buried in the graveyard of the district Koran, located in Isfahan in modern-day Iran. Nizam Al-Mulk's killer was soon caught and executed for murder. He was identified as a devotee of the Batiniya sect at the time, but some people argued that he had instead been hired by Taj al-Mulk to eliminate Nizam al-Mulk. Yet others believed that it was Malik Shah who had arranged for the assassin in order to get rid of his too powerful vizier. In his book Tariq al-Mashahir, The History of Famous People, Qazi Muhammad Suleiman Mansurpuri comments on these theories saying, "These are all suppositions. Allah heard his pious servant's prayer, saw his yearning, and allowed him to rest in peace in the company of the companions of the Prophet and the martyrs, giving him a blessing beyond that of a government position, to become a martyr in the same place where centuries before, the companions of the Prophet had been martyred." Personality and character. Nizam al-Mulk's life is a wonder to read. He was as particular about obeying Allah in his private life as he was in his capacity as vizier. As soon as he would hear the call to prayer, adhan, he would pause whatever activity he was engaged in to go pray. If the adhan was not called on time, he himself would stand up to recite it. He tried to remain in a state of ablution, wudu, all the time, and would recite extra prayers, nawafil, after every wudu. He fasted not only during Ramadan, but also on other days of the year as per the Prophet's practice. He always kept a copy of the Quran with himself and gave great importance and respect to the ahadith of Prophet Muhammad, SAW. He used to say that he knew he wasn't worthy of being a narrator of a hadith, but he longed to be counted amongst them on the Day of Judgment. He preferred to spend his free time in the company of scholars and learned men, saying that he liked those scholars who pointed out his faults so that he may improve himself. He was always careful to give them his full respect and attention, and when visited by Imam al-Harmain or the famous theologian Abu al-Qasim, he often stood up and invited them to sit in his place as an expression of his respect for them. Nizam Al-Mulk liked to spend time with the common people, especially the poor, in order to prevent any arrogance or snobbery from entering his heart. Poor people routinely joined him for meals at his house and ate their fill. Abu al-Qasim describes an incident where he was invited to Nizam al-Mulk's house for a meal. Another vizier, Amid al-Mulk, was seated next to Nizam al-Mulk, and next to him was a pauper whose right hand was cut off. When the meal was served and the pauper began to eat with his left hand, traces of disapproval and distaste appeared on Amid al-Mulk's face. Nizam al-Mulk caught his expression and called the pauper over to sit next to him and enjoy the rest of his meal. Nizam al-Mulk's generosity was talk of the town. When his travel route was known, rows of needy people would line the streets, and Nizam al-Mulk would walk past them, distributing bags of coins to all who asked. Some people, of course, used this trait of his to take advantage of him. Several biographers have related an incident in this regard. They write that once Nizam al-Mulk's ride passed by an elderly man who told him his needs and received a bag of coins in return. Now the elderly man got greedy and decided to disguise himself as a disabled man, waiting again at a street Nizam al-Mulk would pass by. Nizam al-Mulk gave him another bag of coins. The man changed his disguise once more, and this time asked for money so he could marry his young daughters. Nizam al-Mulk gave him the money once more. Again, the man disguised himself, this time as a tired and wounded veteran soldier who had been defeated and lost all his money, and came once more to take advantage of Nizam al-Mulk's generosity. Nizam al-Mulk gave him another bag of money, smiling, and said, "Here, elderly man who is also disabled, and a father of young daughters, and a war veteran, here is another bag of coins for you." Apart from being generous, Nizam al-Mulk was also very tolerant and forgiving. He did not like to avenge small slights or mistakes, nor was he an unforgiving master to his servants. Once a sandstorm left a layer of dust on his bed that was neglected by his servants because they did not arrive on time to fulfill their duties. When the steward saw what had happened, he was furious and began to berate the servants for their incompetence. Nizam al-Mulk stepped in, saying, "It's all right, perhaps they went to take care of something else. We all have private matters that need our attention, and all of us occasionally neglect our duties. Allah has given us a higher rank than them, and the way to thank Him does not involve punishing them for the smallest mistakes." Nizam al-Mulk believed in ignoring and disregarding personal insults because it ultimately led to better results. A powerful and principled man must necessarily make many enemies. When those who were jealous of his influence or were angry at his lack of support for their agendas slandered and insulted him, he usually chose not to reply or punish them. Once a poet that was under Nizam al-Mulk's sponsorship became angry with him and said several nasty verses impugning Nizam al-Mulk's honor. When Nizam al-Mulk heard, he did not punish him. Instead, he increased the amount of the regular grant that the poet received. These characteristics of his personality were what endeared Nizam al-Mulk to the people and made him so trustworthy in their eyes. All historians who describe the personality of Nizam al-Mulk admit that he had a major contribution in the greatness of the Seljuk Empire. The famous British historian of Iran, Edward Brown, says, He was the best organizer and a great thinker. He appreciated the value of good people and aspired for the education and prosperity for the masses. In his book A History of Persia, he names Nizam Al-Mulk as the most successful political thinker in the entire Islamic world. Ibn Khaldun writes, "For 20 years Nizam Al-Mulk was the de facto ruler of the empire, while the real sultan had nothing to do but sit on his throne or go hunting." It is no wonder that the sultan accorded great respect to Nizam Al-Mulk. When one looks at Nizam Al-Mulk's great administration and clever but sincere politics, keeping in mind the Muslim rulers of today's time, a prayer for better leaders comes unbidden to the lips. May Allah grant us such rulers, viziers, and advisors who consider their duties responsibly and as a trust. The collective decline that Muslim societies appear to be headed towards is steered predominantly by despicable rulers, corrupt viziers, and their incompetent and incapable ministers. In his book Siyasatnama, Nizam Al-Mulk quotes the Persian king Darius, saying, "The true reasons for the fall of an empire are the carelessness of the king and the dishonesty of the vizier." Allah imposes incompetent and dishonorable leaders on nations whose moral character has been corrupted and whose dealings are full of dishonesty. The Prophet's famous saying that, "Your deeds are your rulers," meaning that as you are, your leaders will be, endorses this phenomenon. Nizam al-Mulk knew this to be true based on the experience of a lifetime. Although he emphasizes the importance of honor and competence in the leadership, he also calls the people towards moral and religious elevation. If today's rulers are heedless of their responsibilities and morally corrupt, so are the people they govern. The only way to get rid of such leaders in favor of better ones is to reform individually and to work for the collective reform of the whole society.